this is the Module 1 session. We're going to be addressing the Virginia Essentialized Standards of Learning. That's the VESOL as you will come to know them today, and then also some instructional resources that are available. So we'll go ahead and go to the next slide, Leah. And I want to start out, first of all, by saying that there was definitely some prior training about the new VAAP before today. And I want to point you to those resources to make sure that if you did not attend one of those sessions prior to today, that you know where you can find that. The webinars that we offered in the spring addressed what's here on the screen, and you can see an overview of VAAP was provided, the old VAAP, meaning the VAAP that was administered in this prior school year, and then an overview of the new VAAP that will be coming for the coming school year for 21-22. And then there's information about the Virginia Essentialized Standards of Learning, the VESOL, which we'll be going into in greater depth today. And then there's also some information about the test design for the new VAAP, just a basic overview of what that is, and some frequently asked questions. So that's a webinar, again, that happened back in the spring. A recording is available, and I'm going to direct you to where you can find that recording now. So if you go to the Virginia Department of Education homepage, and you can see on the left-hand side the home signal that representing that you're at the DOE homepage, which is just doe.virginia.gov. And then if you look on the right-hand side on the How Do I Find column, and if you scroll about halfway down the page, there's a VAAP listing there. So when you click on that VAAP listing, you'll see on the next screen that it takes you to the specific page related to VAAP. And I've highlighted that new teacher introductory webinar, or it's not new really, it's about the new VAAP. It's been out there for a little bit, but I would encourage you, if you have not heard much about the new VAAP, or if you were not able to attend that webinar, this is a good opportunity to catch up on that recording and get a little bit more detail about sort of the general information or introductory details related to the new Virginia alternate assessment that's in place for this coming year. So with that in mind, I want to get into what we're going to be talking about today. From here on out, after that introductory webinar, we're planning to provide training in modules, or potentially 3 different modules. And this is module 1 today. We're focusing on the connection between academic standards, instruction, and assessment. And from our graphic here, you'll see that we look at that as a network that has to work together. Each of those parts of that triangle need to reinforce one another, and they are very closely connected in order to make it all successfully function. So our session today is really going to focus on part of this. And if you go to the next slide, Leah, we'll talk a little bit more about module 1. So what we're talking about is the content standards in reading, mathematics, and science for the new Virginia Alternate Assessment Program. And those are referred to as VESOL, or the Virginia Essentialized Standards of Learning. So we'll address a little bit about those in greater detail than we did in the introductory webinar. And we'll also talk about the curricular information or instructional resources that are available to support you in providing quality instruction. So again, our focus today is not so much on the specific assessment as it is focusing on the standards, the academic standards, and the instructional resources that we're starting to make available to you. It will be in later modules, module 2 and module 3, that will focus on student participation and then topics specifically related to test administration. So that's our plan for today, is to include in module 1 the actual standards themselves and also the curricular or instructional resources that are available to you. You can see that we've had a number of webinars related to this topic, module 1, both for special education directors and division directors of testing, as well as school principals and other school administrators. So hopefully someone in your division and hopefully multiple people in your division have already been involved and been made aware of Module 1 and where we're headed with both the VESOL themselves, the academic content standards for this population of students, and the instructional resources that are available. So today's webinar is geared towards teachers and other school staff. So we'll be talking about resources that will help you in the classroom directly. And you can see that we've had one of these webinars already, and we have 2 more to go. And we're very pleased to see that we're hitting the registration maximums on these. So there's certainly a lot of interest. So we're very pleased with that. So for today, we're going to focus on 3 important questions. The presentation that you hear will address who is taught. So we'll talk more about that population of students with significant cognitive disabilities and what their characteristics are. And then we're going to talk about what is being taught, or a more specific overview of the Virginia Essentialized Standards of Learning, or once again, the VESOL as we refer to them. And then the other piece is how to approach instruction. That's the 3rd part of today's Module 1. So we'll talk about curricular or instructional information and those resources that are available to you. And then we'll end with a period for questions, and we'll try to answer those questions that we receive from you today. So during this module, you should be able to see a Q&A feature down at the bottom of your screen that gives you an opportunity to submit questions to us. We have a number of Department of Education staff online as panelists this afternoon that are monitoring those questions. And we also have some folks from the training and technical assistance centers, the regional centers across the state, that are joining with us today to provide support and help address questions as they come in. This module is being recorded, and a version of it will be available on the Department of Education's website once we conclude all of the presentations. So with that done, I'm going to hand it over to Sharon Seiler so she can begin the next portion of the presentation related to students with significant cognitive disabilities.
Thank you so much, Sarah. Are you able to hear me clearly?
No, I can hear you, Sharon. You're good to go.
All right. Well, I'd like to join Sarah in welcoming everyone and thanking you for joining us at this time. We certainly realize that this is a busy time of year. Many of you have already started school, and there are those of you who are going to be starting school soon, right after Labor Day. So at this time, it's all about getting ready to have a successful school year. And I can say that I have been in that spot. Right now, I work at the Department of Ed in the assessment unit, but I am a special education teacher, and I have taught the population of students that our new Virginia Alternate Assessment Program focuses on. So I come to you today with knowledge of the student, and also being one that has grappled with what do I teach and how do I teach to make sure that the instruction I provide to my students is meaningful, and that it really meets the needs of my students. So the first question or topic that I want to address in this presentation is who is taught. And for many of you, this is going to be information that you've heard before, because who is taught, when we look at the old VAAP, and compare it to the new VAAP, the participation criteria has not changed. But even though there's no change in the participation criteria, it's important for us to do a quick review of this population of students, because that assessment triangle that Sarah showed you earlier, the foundation of that is the appropriate students. And in this case, it's students with significant cognitive disabilities. So Leah, if you could go to the next slide. What we know for sure that this is a small population of students, and according to IDEA and the Every Student Succeeds Act, we know that when we say small, that it actually constitutes less than 1% of the student population. And when it comes to identifying these students, they may actually have a variety of disability categories. Some of these students that fit into the 1% population may be identified as having moderate and severe intellectual disabilities. Others, what you're going to see is that they're identified under multiple disabilities, autism, or possibly even deaf blindness with intellectual disabilities. So we have a variety of disability categories. Next slide, Leah. And in addition to having a variety of disability categories, this population of students also exhibits some or all of the following characteristics. And I know when I think back on my classroom of students, I can certainly agree with this list because I saw them in many of my students. So let's just take a minute or two to walk through the characteristics. So oftentimes what we find with students with significant cognitive disabilities is difficulties in communication that really affects the students functioning in a variety of areas, in self-determination, in their behavior, in their social interactions with others, in participation across multiple learning settings. We also see, and this is really important, uneven learning patterns. And again, all domains are going to be impacted. The cognitive domain, communication is impacted, socialization, and self-help. The third bullet here on your slide was a characteristic that I saw with at least 2 of the students that were in my classroom, where there were other disabilities that occurred concurrently with their intellectual needs. And those multiple disabling conditions may include physical disabilities, sensory challenges in vision and in hearing, medical needs that impact the students' health, their stamina, and their engagement just across the board with various learning tasks. And those physical disabilities and those medical needs also oftentimes will present as motor impairments that make even routine activities, routine tasks very challenging. And then finally, across the board, I believe we experience students who have difficulty learning new tasks, maintaining new skills that are taught, and then in generalizing those skills to other learning settings. And finally, in terms of how students access information, we see very individualized methods that students may have alternative ways to access and process information that may span a tactile method, a more visual method, an auditory method, or a multisensory method. So we see all of these characteristics that may be present with this population of students. So what we have to keep in mind if we are to identify students that are going to be appropriate for what I'm going to talk about in terms of instruction, and then in later modules in terms of the actual test, we really have to keep in mind that not every student is going to fit the criteria for the new VAAP. So a student, just because a student has a label or is identified under the category of autism, or as a student with multiple disabilities, or even intellectual disabilities, it doesn't automatically mean that they're going to fit the criteria to participate in the Virginia Alternate Assessment Program. Those decisions are very important ones, and they're always made by the student's IEP team. And the IEP team is really given guidance and some parameters as to how they should make that decision. And that information is found in the VAAP participation criteria and the determination of significant cognitive disabilities. Those documents are really intended to guide IEP teams, to give them appropriate parameters so that each team can make sure that they identify students appropriately. Okay, Leah. So when we think about the diversity in the population, and we think about the various learning characteristics and physical characteristics that might be, think about the students in your classroom. Although they're under that broad label of significant cognitive disabilities, the students may present very differently. So let me introduce you to Matthew, a 5th grade student. And Matthew's a student with significant cognitive disabilities, but he reads and he writes. He has some sight word recognition. He's able to do basic math with a calculator and concrete objects. He's able to use speech effectively. But he's easily distracted. There's a seizure disorder that whenever Matthew has a seizure, he is fatigued, and he may also have some physical difficulties. In terms of writing, he's able to write legibly, but you certainly see the legibility decrease as the muscles that he uses for writing begin to get weary and fatigued. And Matthew does have some emerging visual spatial understandings in terms of left to right, up and down, and fitting numbers into spaces. So that's Matthew, a student with significant cognitive disabilities. But if we go on to our next student, who is Corey, a 7th grader. And what we see is Corey's learning needs are very different from Matthew's. He's able to identify familiar pictures and picture symbols. He does have a sight word vocabulary, like Matthew did, but his is around 35 words. He's able to answer basic recall questions if he's given a short passage of content. But in terms of his communication abilities, his are very different than Matthew. Corey's able to speak in 2 or 3 word phases, but the articulation is really poor. He also has some repetitive behaviors. And when it comes to writing, he's able to do it independently in terms of his personal information, but also if he has text that is presented to him that he can copy. Corey does have some computer skills. He's able to use a computer mouse, and again, he's able to type if he is provided with a model. And then our third student, Lucy, who is a high school student. And Lucy, again, presenting very differently than Matthew and Corey. What we see first off with Lucy is her physical needs. She uses a manual wheelchair, and she has to have assistance because Lucy is a student with cerebral palsy. That has affected her motor skills to the point that she's able to use one hand to manipulate, her right hand to manipulate larger items, and then use her left hand for another purpose, which is to keep that item stable. She's able to communicate, but her communication is different than Matthew and Corey. Lucy only has access to 5 to 10 single words, and then she is able to use yes, no responses. And that is really supplemented by the use of an augmentative communication system, which allows Lucy to communicate her basic needs, to make choices. And in terms of the learning setting, she uses a picture board, which she, again, is able to use her right hand to access the communication device, and especially if it has a properly mounted key guard. And what we see with Lucy that we haven't seen in the other two students is that there is some issues with vision and hearing. The vision has been partially corrected with glasses. In terms of her auditory needs, there is a moderate hearing loss, and which requires Lucy to use hearing aids, which she doesn't tolerate very well. And like Matthew, there is a seizure disorder, but in Lucy's case, we really see it controlled well with meds. So Matthew, Corey, and Lucy, yes, they're at different grade levels, but they are all under that umbrella of students with significant cognitive disabilities. But boy, are they different. Their learning needs certainly point to this being a very diverse population of students. Okay, so if we take our thoughts about diversity in the population, and as you think about the diversity in your classroom, it brings us to the second topic or the second question in this presentation. What do I teach? What is taught? What do I teach so that it would be meaningful and appropriate for a very broad classroom of student needs? And this is where the Virginia Essentialized Standards of Learning come in, or the VESOLs. So let's just start with some information as to how the VESOLs were developed. So Lee, if you go to the next slide. And for those of you who attended our presentation in the spring, you probably heard this information, so we're not going to go too much in depth here, but we do want to give some background as to how the VESOLs were created, because these are the content standards. When you think about that triangle again that Sarah presented at the beginning of this presentation, the VESOLs are the content standards. They represent the what to teach when it comes to reading, math, and science. So the VESOLs, again, reading, math, and science, were developed by VDOE staff, but who were in partnership with our assessment partner, the the Behavioral Research and Teaching at the University of Oregon. But in addition to that partnership, we were also very fortunate to have Virginia special education teachers come alongside and assist in this process. So we had special education teachers from 27 school divisions across the Commonwealth. The process that we used was actually developed by BRT, or the Behavioral Research and Teaching. They developed a process called Essentialization. And that process is used to take our general ed content standards, or the standards of learning, and then to reduce them in such a way that they were reduced in depth, breadth, and complexity to make the content in reading, math, and science relevant, accessible, and appropriate for students with significant cognitive disabilities. So let's take a deeper look at the VESOLs. What you have on the screen now is Webb's depth of knowledge, and it's based on a hierarchy of verbs that really paint a picture in terms of cognitive processes. And in the graphic, it's divided into four quadrants, or 4 levels. Level 1 is recall, level 2 is application, and then sort of faded out is level 3, strategic thinking, and also sort of faded out is level 4, extended thinking. The reason that 3 and 4 are faded out a little bit is because those are the cognitive processes that we would see in general education instruction, and then in our general education test, which is the standards of learning test. But for alternate assessments, for students with significant cognitive disabilities, we really stay within the framework of level 1 and level 2. And you'll notice within level 1, particular verbs, and level 2, you'll notice specific verbs. So it's kind of small, but a few of the verbs that you see in level 1 are words like recognize, list, match. In level 2, you see verbs like estimate, like organize, classify. But this is, according to Webb's depth of knowledge, the level of cognitive processes, the 2 levels of cognitive processes that would be appropriate, again, if we go back to the student population or students with significant cognitive disabilities. So let's see what that looks like. We have developed a document that includes all of the VESOLs, all the standards that need to be taught for this population of students. So we have the VESOLs for reading and mathematics, and they are available for grades 3 through 8 and high school. And then we also have VESOLs for science that are available for grades 5, 8, and high school. Again, these are the content standards, but they also represent the content that the VAAP test is going to be based on. And so in this document, the document is organized so that each content area begins with a summary matrix. And I'm going to show that to you on the next slide. But that summary matrix really lists all the VESOLs in that particular content area by grade level. So it's a great snapshot of the content area across all of the grades listed in the 2 previous bullets. So in addition to the summary matrix, and right after the summary matrix, the VESOLs are laid out one by one. And what you have for each VESOL is going to be the reporting category that it falls in. And we all know that the SOL program is arranged by reporting categories. So the same thing here is going to exist for how we categorize the VESOLs. So you'll see the reporting categories. Then each VESOL also has a code, a very simple code that shows the content area, the grade level, and the VESOL number. Then you'll also see the SOL that the VESOL is derived from. Keep in mind, when we talked about essentialization, each VESOL is really an SOL that's been reduced in depth, breadth, and complexity to make it appropriate for students with significant cognitive disabilities. And then each VESOL also has a complexity continuum. And that's a very important part of what this document has. And that VESOL continuum I'm going to talk about a little bit later, but you'll certainly see statements that begin with those verbs from level 1 and level 2 in Webb's depth of knowledge that I talked about a little bit earlier. So Leah, let's go to the next slide. And this is the summary matrix that I mentioned. This is a sample of the summary matrix for reading. So you can see in the right-hand column, the left-hand column, what's listed in this matrix is the reporting category. So in reading, we have 2 reporting categories: demonstration of, to demonstrate comprehension of fictional text, and the use of word analysis strategies. Then the same reporting category, only a little different, because the second reporting category you see on the screen focuses on comprehension of nonfiction texts. And then if you start to look to your right, you'll see the VESOLs grades 3 through 8 in high school. If you'll notice, for example, in grade 3, the way the VESOLs are laid out for reading for grade 3, there's 6 VESOLs that are going to focus on the fictional text and use of word analysis strategies. And then have 5 VESOLs that are going to focus on the comprehension of nonfiction text. So you're going to see that same pattern across all of the grade levels. And again, this is just a sample, but you would see in the document a summary matrix for reading, 1 for math and 1 for science. So when we look at the VESOL code, in terms of format, it's a very simple format that is really designed after the ASOL codes that we use for the old VAAP. So for the VESOL code, all of the codes, regardless of the content area, begin with a letter. And that letter tells you the content area. So in this case, the R is there for reading. For science, the code is going to begin with an S. For math, the code is going to begin with an M. And then there's a dash, and then the number right after the dash is the grade level. So in this case, this reading VESOL is for grade 5. And then the last number you see is just a chronological ordering of the VESOLs, which would be the VESOL number. And in this case, this one falls in slot number 4. Okay, so when we take VESOL R54 a step further, what you'll see in the document, beginning in the left-hand column, you'll see the code itself, R54, and then right under that, you're going to see an SOL. And in this case, SOL 5.6C. What that means is this VESOL is derived from this particular standard of learning. Again, it's a grade 5 reading standard that VESOL R54 is based on. Okay, and that's really important information because as a special education teacher, if there are resources or professional development being offered to general education staff members or either other special education teachers who are teaching the general ed content, that helps us or may help you identify those particular resources or that staff development meeting may help you as a teacher of significant cognitive disabilities teach this particular VESOL. Okay, and then in the column to the next column to the right for VESOL text and the complexity continuum. In this case, the expectation from the text, the VESOL text, is that the student will answer questions about the main idea of a nonfiction text that is read to the student or that the student reads. And then right under that, we see the complexity continuum, which I'd really like to take a second to define what that is. The complexity continuum is the range of instruction that would be related to this VESOL. And it exists because the students that you're going to be serving are diverse. And we talked about that earlier. So this continuum allows you as a classroom teacher to address the diversity of students who may be in the same grade level, but very different in terms of their cognitive disabilities and other characteristics that relate to the diversity of their learning needs. So let's look at this a little further and unpack, if you will, this reading VESOL. Well, first of all, it begins with what the student is going to be asked to do, which is to answer questions. But it specifies for you as a teacher what those questions really are to hone in on. It's not everything, but it's specifically the main idea. And then the type of text is really clarified again, nonfiction text. So in terms of what are you going to be teaching? You're going to be teaching from a nonfiction text for the student, and what you're going to be asking the student to do is to answer questions about the main idea. Now, what's in purple is really important here because it allows some broad flexibility in terms of how that text is presented to students. It can be either read to the student or that the student reads themselves. And again, when we think about this population, there are students that are readers, and then other students who need the support of the teacher or someone in the classroom reading the text to them. Okay, so let's go on to the complexity continuum, because that's going to even provide additional information, particularly about the text, the amount of text in this nonfiction reading passage. So that text can range from a single sentence of 6 or fewer words. And having a single sentence presented would be appropriate for some students. Whereas with other students, that text might be 2 sentences that are longer, 5 to 7 words each, or even going as far as a short paragraph. So within this one VESOL, what we are seeing laid out in this complexity continuum is a broad range that makes this VESOL with this flexibility appropriate to students that have very different needs, but may be in the same grade level. Okay. So let's go to our next slide. So this is an example. I'm a teacher. I'm teaching this particular VESOL. Matthew and Kate are both in my classroom, but they're different students in terms of their learning needs. So Matthew, he's a 5th grade grader who is identified with a significant cognitive disability. But in terms of how Matthew accesses this particular VESOL, he reads a short paragraph. So Matthew it's appropriate for him to have really the end of that complexity continuum. So he is going to be reading a short paragraph. His teacher, and the paragraph is about the first Olympics. He may need his teacher's help, but Matthew is the one that is he's a student who does have some reading skills. And so after they read this paragraph together, Matthew is able to play a game on the computer in which he answers questions about the main idea. And Matthew does a great job. In the same classroom, though, we have his classmate, Kate. Kate presents very differently than Matthew, even though they're both 5th grade students. She is nonverbal, and she uses a switch to indicate yes, no responses. In Kate's case, the teacher is reading the information about the first Olympic Games, and it's two short sentences, not a paragraph like in Matthew's case, but 2 short sentences. The first Olympic Games were held in Greece. Winners received medals. Because Kate is easily distracted, the teacher has to make sure that she gets Kate's attention as she is reading these 2 sentences. So she's pointing to each word as she reads. That probably wasn't necessary for Matthew, but it certainly is helpful for Kate. So after reading the sentence, the teacher asks Kate, what is this story about? Again, she's honing in on main idea. And she shows Kate 3 cards with 3 answer choices. And because Kate is using a yes/no switch, whenever her teacher, Kate indicates no with her switch, whenever the teacher gives her the answer choice, an answer choice for winners. Is this story about winners? No, and Kate indicates no. Is this story about books? She also indicates no with her switch. But when she's presented with the card that says Olympics, Kate knows that this is what the story is about, so she indicates yes with her switch when she's shown the card Olympics. So Kate does a great job as well. Different students, they're accessing the same VESOL, but that complexity continuum and the VESOL itself really gives the flexibility so that Matthew and Kate can receive appropriate instruction on this content. Okay, so let's go to the next slide. So your question at this point, where can I have access to the VESOLs? and you saw a similar slide that Sarah showed you earlier as to where you could get the recording for the webinar that we did in May, back in the spring. Well, the VESOLs are located in the same place. If you go to our home page, and you would get to our home page by going to DOE.Virginia. Virginia has to be spelled out, .gov. It's going to, when you put that in, DOE.Virginia.gov, it's going to bring you to the home page. If you look at the column under How Do I Find, on the right-hand side of the home page, scroll down to VAAP, and what you're going to find there today is the list of the document that I just talked about, with all of the VESOLs for reading, for math, and for science. So this is the quickest way to get directly to that information. Okay. So here are just a few tips as you start this school year. First of all, you want to make absolutely certain that you have each student's correct grade level, because again, what you teach is going to be determined by the student's grade level, because the VESOLs are all organized by grade level, and this ensures that you are teaching the right content in reading, math, and science for your students. Your students, like we've already talked about, are going to be composed of students with diverse learning needs. So your instruction is going to have to be designed in such a way that it accommodates the needs of each student. And for teachers of significant cognitive disabilities, this is how we have always taught, where we have to look at each student individually and then design instruction so that it's appropriate for each child. Another tip, collaborate and consult with other teachers and general educators. Even though you're teaching the VESOLs, keep in mind that the VESOLs are derived from the standards of learning. So there are lots of common ground there between teachers of students with significant cognitive disabilities, other special education teachers, and general education teachers. You might ask yourself, well, how am I going to teach all of this content? One of the things that has always worked for teachers, I believe, is to look at the development of thematic units that incorporate VESOLs from more than one content area, or that will incorporate multiple VESOL from a single content area. So in teaching that unit, you're really covering a lot of content ground. Fifth, to ensure, make sure that each student has a means of communication. This is so important. And whether that student is communicating verbally or using some sort of augmentative communication like a picture board or a switch, we really have to nail this, and that is that every student has a means of demonstrating what they know. And then the last two, if they're training, there's training offered by your school division, and we certainly want you to attend the modules that VDOE is offering, but there's probably going to be many opportunities for professional development and training offered by your school division. Make sure that you attend them. The new VAAP assessment is very different than the old VAAP. So any opportunity to learn more as to about what you can expect and really how to provide quality instruction is going to be very helpful. And then lastly, keep your expectations high. It's real important that as students are presented with this content, that we as teachers believe that they can do it. So our expectations are important, our high expectations. All right, I believe that was my last slide. So I'd now like to welcome our partners at the Technical Assistance Centers who have worked very hard over spring and summer to create instructional resources so that you can have support as teachers as you go about teaching the VESOL content. So TTAC staff.
All right, thank you very much. Are you getting an echo? No, okay. I am Karen Berlin, and I am at the TTAC at George Mason, and joining me this afternoon is Shelley Jewell, who is at the TTAC at VCU. And we're really happy to be with you this afternoon to share some information about the various resources that are available to support your instruction in the new VESOL. So as we move to the next slide, the good news is, the really, really good news is while a lot is changing, good instruction is not. Good instruction remains good instruction. So as you're adjusting to the new VESOLs and a new assessment form and process, all those things that you know about quality instruction are going to remain the same. So what that means is that good teachers are going to start the year by doing some good assessment and knowing what present levels of performance are. You want to start with that pre-assessment and really have a good idea of where students are entering. And then as Sharon just highlighted, you want to make sure that every student has an effective communication system in place or initiated so that you can build upon that, because students have to have a way to show what they know. Once you have that good, strong present level of performance and a good grasp on an effective communication system, then you just move forward with instruction the way you always do. You look at the VESOL, you plan and design high quality instruction using evidence-based practices. You do lots of progress monitoring. You see how students are performing through your formative assessment, and you either reteach in a different way or in a stronger dosage, or you move on. So just as before, data is always going to be your guide. You're going to collect, review, and analyze that data for your instructional decision making. And as we've learned quite well over the past year and a half, just always increasing that family engagement for that support at home are going to be the best things that you can do, regardless of if it's an ASOL or a VESOL. So those of you who've been teaching for a while, you're going to find instructionally not that much is going to change. Your adaptation is going to be to a new assessment. And for those of you who are just entering the field, good for you. This will be all that you know. So we encourage you to continue just delivering high quality instruction as you always would. As we move on to the next slide, I've put a link in the chat. What we want you to know is that there is a myriad of resources to support you in that high quality instruction. And that's what we're going to spend our portion of the time going through. It's just kind of a gallery walk of what has been put together for you to use in your instruction this fall and throughout the school year. Our resources fall into three main categories. There are crosswalks, which Shelley is going to outline for you in the next few slides. There are instructional resources that link you to evidence-based practices and high quality sample activities to support your instruction. We know another thing's happened in the last year is people have kind of experienced an avalanche of resources, and sometimes the time to filter all that is a challenge. And so the TTACs have worked hard to kind of mine out the very best resources for you, and you can count on those documents to lead you to places where you're really going to find good things to support your instruction. And finally, we have some sample activities to give you an idea, kind of a launch pad, similar to what Sharon talked to you through earlier about what instruction, what a learning activity might look like associated with a particular VESOL. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Shelley to tell you a little bit more about the crosswalks.
All right, the VESOL crosswalks will link the VESOL to past ASOL and ASOL sample activities, as well as current SOLs and applied studies competencies. TTAC Online will have posted resources that will include the VESOL literacy crosswalk, a mathematics crosswalk, a science crosswalk, and a VESOL comprehensive crosswalk, which includes all 3 domains. The crosswalks are an invaluable instructional planning tool. Within one click, teachers will be able to connect both aligned current SOL and applied studies competency content and resources, past ASOL content, and sample activities. The crosswalks provide a convenient collaboration tool for you to identify appropriate SOL and applied studies content upon which to co-plan with general education teachers in your building and draw upon similarly associated school and division resources to support instruction. Similarly, veteran teachers familiar with the newly retired ASOL can see and quickly access ASOL-related content and activities for their VESOL instruction, planning, and delivery. Let's take a look at some sample crosswalks. Each content domain crosswalks will have the VESOL ID to the SOL ID, list out the full standard and crosswalks to the applied studies competency. The crosswalks will enable teachers to access and utilize all curriculum supports and resources for SOL and applied studies curriculum map instruction when planning and delivering VESOL instruction. This is an example of a reading VESOL crosswalk showing a 5th grade reading VESOL with the associated SOL and applied studies competency. Content domain crosswalks also provide links to retired ASOL and ASOL sample activities so teachers can easily reference related sample activities and content. This is an example showing 4th grade reading VESOL linked to the associated retired ASOL and sample lessons that were posted on TTAC Online for the old VAAP. The ASOL numbers, descriptions, and direct links to retired ASOL sample activities are provided so that teachers can make connections to the lessons they have previously used for instruction for the ASOLs. These crosswalk linkages exist across all VESOLs and grade levels. As we saw with the reading crosswalk sample, the mathematics crosswalk shows the opportunity for collaboration and instructional planning with general education teachers in mathematics by linking the VESOL to associated SOL. It also links to the applied studies competency. Using the crosswalk allows for collaboration and instructional planning across all domains. Again, all content domain VESOL crosswalks link to related VESOL and associated retired ASOL and sample lessons that were formerly posted on TTAC Online for the old VAAP. This is an example showing mathematics ASOL and sample activity links you will find when you open the crosswalks on TTAC Online. This slide shows an example of a science crosswalk to the SOL and applied studies curriculum map. As we saw with the reading and math crosswalk samples, the science crosswalk shows the opportunity for collaboration and instructional planning with general educators and science by linking the VESOL to associated SOL. It also links the applied studies competency. This is a final example showing retired science ASOL and sample activity links you will find when you open the crosswalks on TTAC Online.
Okay, so now that you've had a chance to just get a quick glimpse at some of the different crosswalks that are there to enhance your collaboration with your general education colleagues and link you to your former familiarity with the ASOLs, we want to show you the collection of instructional resources that are found on TTAC Online. The resources have been compiled into different categories. So one category is broadly evidence-based practices for students with significant cognitive disabilities across all content areas. Just how do you teach this very diverse but very small population of students? And then there are domain-specific resources for literacy, mathematics, and science. And finally, we have some information about AAC and assistive technology. So let's take a look at the evidence-based practices for students with cognitive disabilities first. So what you'll find when you click on that link is a list. You'll find a list of the best national and state centers, including our own, and the materials and resources they have to support constant improvement and continuous growth in teaching students with significant cognitive disabilities. What you see on the screenshot are two small pictures of what that will look like. I put the link in the chat box if you want to open up the page and explore yourself. But for those of you who like to keep one window open and stay focused, that's me, you can see the screenshot. So when you open up the link, you'll get a listing of resources. And then when you click on one of those links, it will take you directly to the resource. So on the next slide, you'll see a sample of what some of those resources might be. Hopefully some of those centers and information will be familiar to you. The Affirm modules, which are available to teach evidence-based practices for students with autism. The Cedar Center provides what is pictured on the right, and that is an 80-page compendium of best practices for students with significant cognitive disabilities. So one of the things that we hear often is, you know, I understand the VESOLs, but how do I teach this student? Taking a look at this compilation of resources will help you discover evidence-based practices ranging from students who are deaf-blind to students with significant visual impairment to students with autism who have significant cognitive disabilities. So we hope that you'll check that out. On the next slide, you'll discover a content-specific instructional resource, and we have one of these for reading, mathematics, and science. And I'm going to walk you through the reading instructional resource first. The way these resources are formatted is they start general and they funnel down. So you'll see on this particular slide that for reading instruction for our population of students, we know that instruction is going to be sequential and cumulative, explicit and systematic, multisensory, and planned with universal design for learning in mind. We start with those broad concepts and the models of reading. So within this document, you're going to find information on the simple view of reading, the reading rope, and the hourglass model. So if you think about trying to take all of the information about reading and collapse it down into one document, that's what we've tried to provide for you. So we start with the models, and then on this slide, you'll see we have information and a few resources for each element of reading. So when you take a look at this slide, you'll see that you're going to find information on building background knowledge, vocabulary development, language structures, verbal reasoning, literacy knowledge, phonological awareness, decoding, sight recognition, resources that are going to support good reading instruction for any student. Then finally, when we go to the next slide, you'll see that in that column to the right will be a few kind of I don't want to say the best because we don't have the permission to judge the best, but high quality resources where you're going to find the most diverse and helpful resources to support the instruction in that particular reading element. Then it funnels completely down to a specific focus on our students with significant cognitive disabilities. So we're moving from reading instruction for all to reading instruction for specific needs, reading intervention that's going to match a student's instructional need, to reading instruction specific to students with significant cognitive disabilities. We can't start at the bottom of the funnel and work back up. We have to kind of have that reading instruction knowledge to be able to customize it and make it specific for our students. So we've tried to compile all within one document what teachers need so they can have immediate and easy access to a wealth of resources so that they can plan and deliver high quality reading instruction. On the next slide, you'll see that we've done a similar thing with, this slide gives you an example of some of the content that you'll find that is specific to reading instruction for students with significant cognitive disabilities. And we really hope that as a part of your professional learning, you will take time to review this and become familiar with all that's here. So then on the next slide, we find that we've done the same thing with mathematics instruction. What we want to highlight on this slide is that within all of our resources, the primary resource for VESOL instruction are the VDOE, the Department of Education resources. Accessing and using the VDOE resources are going to maximize your opportunities for collaboration with your general education colleagues and be able to access and draw upon all those resources and information that support SOL instruction. One of the things that's highlighted on this slide is the VDOE Mathematics Vertical Articulation Tool, the MVAT. And we really encourage you to take a look at that because it allows teachers to see how the standards spiral across the grade levels. Sharon showed you that reading summary table. Likewise, the VMAT is going to be really helpful for you to identify the essential skills, knowledge, and processes that are needed for student success. The just-in-time mathematics quick checks that are available on the VDOE site are a great way to collect data and determine gaps in your students' knowledge and understanding. On the next slide, there's a highlight of some of the resources that are available that we've listed for you. One of those is the concrete representational abstract linked resources, and that allows you to use research-based strategies to move from the use of manipulatives to pictures to more abstract representations. If you remember the students that Sharon highlighted for you, Matthew might have the opportunity to build his skills using this strategy that would allow him to start first with use of manipulatives, then move to pictures and graphic presentations, and finally on to more abstract representations that could be connected to using numbers on a calculator. On the next slide, you'll see that we have done the same thing in science. And the science instructional resources provide educators with descriptions and website links that could be used to enhance their VESOL science instruction. A lot of what is listed here are visual supports and videos and opportunities to see things, as well as hear them described when a student is reading or being read to. And likewise, the primary place is going to be the VDOE webpage and all the resources that are available for the science standards of learning, Virginia Learns, and other resources that are constantly updated to support instruction. This is on the next slide is the example of how those resources are listed. And thinking about our sample students, the science resources provided could support Matthew, Corey, or Lucy in building their background knowledge and vocabulary through the videos that are provided, the pictures, and some of the kinesthetic experiences. Teachers can identify words to model so that Lucy's communication system could be used to support her in answering questions about the content being taught. Similarly, Corey could use an external mouse to access the computer and work with a peer to navigate through some of the websites that are listed here to view pictures and hear information about the topics being discussed or taught. We hope that you'll find these VESOL science instruction resources of value to support, extend, and enhance your lessons. And with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Shelley to share a bit about what we've put together for assistive technology.
All right, thank you, Karen. So the resources on the TTAC Online website will also contain a document with information on assistive technology and augmentative and alternative communication, or AAC. Assistive technology is defined officially in IDEA as any item, piece of equipment, or product system, whether acquired commercially, off the shelf, modified, or customized, that is used to increase, maintain, or improve the functional capabilities of a child with a disability. So that just boils down to assistive technology is any tool that helps a child or a student become more independent, access their instructional materials and environment, and show what they know. AT that is used and trialed is a very individualized decision based on your student's strengths and needs, their environment, and the tasks that they need to complete. The Virginia Assistive Technology Consideration Guide, located on the AT Network website, is a useful tool for IEP teams to use to think through AT decisions. A new version of that guide will be available soon that you can use and will be accessible on the Virginia AT Network website. Your division might have also developed their own AT guide that they use that you could ask about and use to address your students' AT needs. So if we think back to our example students, Matthew has fine motor difficulties and fatigues easily. So his IEP team could use that AT consideration guide to brainstorm possible AT solutions for him, which might range from the use of a slant board to position his writing paper on, adapted paper, highlighted lines to help him fit his numbers in the correct space, and or the option to use voice to text to complete his work. As stated previously, assistive technology is a very individualized decision based on many factors. There are several different options available for students to support access to classroom lessons and activities, and to provide them with the tools to make responses to show what they know. Anytime students learn a new skill, such as learning a new way of responding to teacher questions, it is important to provide them with multiple opportunities to practice the skill in multiple ways across a span of time. The VESOL Assistive Technology Resource Sheet that is posted on TTAC Online provides several suggestions for different assistive technology tools that can help students respond during classroom lessons for students who may need a new or different way to respond. We have divided the AT resource sheet into two sections: mid to high tech AT for students to directly access a computer, and low to mid AT strategies for students to provide responses to their teacher. A few of the ideas for students to provide responses on our document include using a 3 to 4 button AAC device, such as Tech Talk, that has built-in switch scanning, accessing the computer using a touchscreen monitor or an adapted joystick mouse, using an eye gaze frame, and more. Some students, like Corey, might benefit from an adapted keyboard with large keys and color coding to increase his typing independence. A student with needs similar to Lucy might benefit from a touchscreen monitor and a response choice board. Using the VESOL AT instructional strategies along with the associated resources will help ensure all students can be effective in showing what they know. Students with complex communication needs benefit from augmentative and alternative communication, or AAC, to communicate with their teachers and peers. AAC is defined as the AT tools and strategies used to help an individual with complex communication needs express their thoughts, wants, feelings, ideas, and more. Students can use AAC devices or strategies to respond to questions and testing, as well as gain attention, share their ideas, socialize, comment, and more. Like instructional AT, the type of AAC used is a very individualized decision. Teachers who have students who use AAC in their classroom should incorporate AAC instruction into lessons daily to continue to teach students how to use their AAC. One way to plan for AAC instruction is to identify the words that will be targeted during lessons. For example, stop, that, and not, and use modeling to demonstrate the use of the words. Another strategy might be descriptive teaching. Instead of programming specific words for a one-time lesson that are otherwise not needed, teachers can teach students to use core words as responses. For example, if Lucy was participating in a lesson on volcanoes, she could use her core words to describe a volcano, such as big, up high, go down, and hot, instead of being asked to identify the word volcano. Likewise, an option for other students might be picture choice boards in order to respond to questions during the lesson. If you're interested in professional development opportunities to learn more about instruction in AAC, we have several reputable resources linked in the resource document that is on TTAC Online. Now I'm going to pass it back over to Karen to show you some VESOL sample activities, or to share details about the sample activities.
Thank you, Shelley. I'm looking at our time, and I want to make sure that we allow time for question and answer. So Leah, we might move through this a little bit more quickly. One of the things that we learned through the ASOL resources with the VAAP is that one of the items that got visited the most on the TTAC Online website, and you'll notice I'm leaving this slide here for a while because we want you to get that TTAC Online imprinted on your brain. The VESOLs will be found on the VDOE website, and the instructional resources are in TTAC Online. If you forget and you just go to TTAC Online, there's a direct link right to the VESOL on the VDOE webpage. But we know that you like sample activities, so we're going to show you quickly what we've put together in regard to that. So the next slide, we have created sample activities for 3rd grade math, 5th grade science, 6th grade mathematics, 7th grade reading, and high school reading, math, and science. Notice the word that I'm using is sample. These are not lesson plans. This is not something you're going to go and grab and have a lesson plan to implement. They're sample activities that are giving display to that complexity continuum that Sharon spoke to earlier. So each sample activity is going to list the VESOL code, the reporting category, the explicit VESOL text, so you're sure what you're teaching, the complexity continuum, so you get an idea of that range, a list of that core vocabulary that Shelley just talked about, and then procedures for a range of instruction, and additional resources, even more resources that are in those documents we showed you before. So on the next slide is an example of what the beginning of a science activity, a sample science activity would contain. You'll see that core vocabularies there, the objective, the other vocabulary that might be included, and then some materials. As previously mentioned, teachers who have students who use AAC in their classroom really want to incorporate that into their daily lessons. And we've designed these sample activities to ensure that that is happening. And then on the next slide, you'll see an outline for the introduction that is included on every sample activity, reminding us that there are many possibilities that exist for lesson creation between the examples that we share. We always are going to encourage you to use your data as your guide, and we hope that you will explore the activities that we've put together for you. Again, they're listed by grade level. So if you click on third grade mathematics, you're going to get a drop down and you'll see a selection of different activities for different VESOL. Likewise, if you go to 7th grade reading, you'll see that same opportunity to select. So with that, I'm going to throw it back to Shelley so we have time for questions.
All right, so once again, for more information on the VESOL instructional strategies, you can visit TTAC online, or you may also contact your regional TTACs for more ideas and information. So we're going to go ahead and pass it back to the VDOE staff for some frequently asked questions.
All right. Thank you, Shelley. Thank you, Karen. We really appreciate the resources and also your presentation. So thanks very much. I am going to put a message in the chat just to get you some an opportunity to provide us with some feedback as we start to get into some frequently asked questions. We've got just a couple that we're going to go through, and then we'll take any other additional questions that may have come in that we need to answer. Okay, so the first one, where are these curricular resources housed? And the good news is, I know that Karen and Shelley have provided you with a link to where those resources are. So TTAC Online is the location. Hopefully you're familiar with it, but if you're not, you're going to see the wealth of resources that are out there. Okay, and then I know this question came in through the Q&A, and we said that we would be addressing it later in the session. So here we are. The question is about history and writing, and how will those be assessed since the new VAAP only assesses reading, mathematics, and science? Well, we know that the reading, math, and science are those content areas that are federally required, or that the U.S. Department of Education requires that we assess. So history and writing are also required, but by Virginia. So we have a little more flexibility in how we assess those two content areas. So what we're looking at is that school divisions are going to collect evidence. So in your classroom, you will be doing similar activities as to what you did previously with history and writing, in that you'll be collecting evidence at those particular grade levels to demonstrate student achievement, and you'll be using the aligned standards of learning. So the same standards that you've been used to using. So those will be in place for both elementary, middle school, and high school history, and middle school and high school writing. Now, there is a little bit of a difference in that once you score those collections locally, you won't be submitting those to the Department of Education. So those will not be used as part of the accountability program. They won't be entered into Pearson Access Next. So no formal score reports provided. We do want you to score them using the VAAP rubric, and we will make those resources available to you on the VAAP homepage here shortly. We are expecting a superintendent's memo with this information to go out next week. Usually they're posted on Friday, so next Friday is what we're anticipating. And we will have some history and writing resources, basically the aligned standards of learning and the VAAP rubric. We'll make sure those are readily available for you on the VAAP webpage. So as far as responsibilities beyond administering the assessment in history and writing, and then also scoring it locally, of course, there is we encourage you to provide the performance information to parents as part of that assessment. So that's the only other aspect that we're looking at there. So again, it should be familiar to you from the perspective of if you have done a VAAP under the previous format, the collection of evidence, then it will be very similar to that. And again, we'll have a memo out next week that will give a little bit more detail about this. Okay, so at this time, I know that there have been a couple questions that have come in, so I want to address a few of those, and maybe if there are others, some of the staff that are online here with me can help out. But I know one of the questions that has come up is, what happens during high school? As in, is there flexibility for when you'll be administering the reading, the math, and the science at the high school level? And just as school divisions had some flexibility with reading, math, and science, and history and writing at high school under the old VAAP, we are expecting that school divisions will have flexibility on when those tests are administered in reading, math, and science. So I encourage you to stay tuned for some of these future modules, the 2 modules that we'll be doing, because we'll be addressing more test administration details during those modules. But the short answer to that question is that we are expecting that divisions will have the flexibility to determine when they administer those assessments in high school. And then I'll take one other question that I know has come in, and that's related to when are these assessments administered, and are they administered only at one time during the year? We do have a test window that we are going to be talking about for the Virginia Alternate Assessment Program. So that means that there will be one time during the year that the assessments are administered. But I will say that that test window is going to be very long, very broad, in that we're talking about it starting in late February, early March, and running until the end of June. So that will allow school divisions and those of you in the classroom plenty of time, is what we're hoping, to be able to get these assessments administered, knowing that the assessments will be administered in a pretty much one-to-one setting where there's a student and an examiner interacting with that student. So we know that it's going to take additional time. It's not going to be like the standards of learning assessments in that there's a 3 to 4 week window and everything is completed. We know that some students will need additional time. We know that they will have more than one day in some cases to finish an assessment. It may be a situation where a student answers a couple of items and needs a break, and perhaps needs a break for the day. So that multiple test session option will definitely be available for students in the VAAP. Let's see if there are any other questions here.
Sharon, there are a lot of questions in regards to the actual test. I mean, are they going to have to, can they choose one VESOL that's selected by the teacher, or are they, will students be assessed on all the VESOLs in each reporting category?
Sure. The VESOLs that are being provided, we will be assessing students on the vast majority of those VESOLs. So it's not a situation like the old VAAP where you select 1 or 2 aligned standards of learning. So there will be a test blueprint that will be published here shortly that will give you the specific VESOLs that are included, but it is the vast majority of them. So it is different than the previous assessment, where as a teacher you selected 1 or 2 ASOLs in each reporting category and went forward with those. Any other questions here that I should be addressing as we wrap up today? Let's see, I'm looking. I know that there was a question about the read aloud accommodation or the audio version of the test, and we want to make it clear that all students will have access to the test being read to them, whether it's through the text-to-speech feature of the computer, the student's taking the online test, or whether the examiner is reading those questions aloud. And the examiner may read the questions aloud if it's an online test that the student is taking, or if the student is taking a paper test. And students will be able to take either the paper or the online assessment. So that's clearly available to them. It's not like the SOL test where there has to be a documented need for a paper test. The paper test will be available to these students readily. And I know there were a few questions more specific to the test administration. What types of supports and accommodations will be available? We'll be addressing those in the upcoming module and getting into more detail about what types of things are available, what types of accommodations, what types of supports for different levels of disabilities. So more to come on that one. And we do have your email address now, so we will make sure that you're aware of any additional webinars that are coming up. Okay, and I know we're after our 6 o'clock time, so thinking that we should probably wrap this up. I really appreciate you joining this afternoon. I want to recognize that this is a very busy time of year for you. We know that if you haven't started school yet, you're preparing to start school. We really appreciate you taking the time, and we understand that this is a change that's being implemented this year. So that in itself is both challenging and it can be anxiety producing. Hopefully there's some positive news out of this for you with you and your students. We look forward to providing additional information about this new assessment and this new opportunity. And we thank you again for joining us today. We hope you have a terrific start to your school year, and we'll be in touch with more information about the VAAP coming forward. Thank you very much, everybody.